All right. Good evening, everyone. The topic for today's webinar is NEP 2020, Leaving No Child Behind. My name is Chirag Bhandari, and I'm the founder of Ennoble Social Innovations. On behalf of Ennoble Social Innovations and Anand Institute of Social Work, which is our partner organization in organizing this event, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you who are present in today's webinar. It's a weekday today, and all of you have made time to be a part of this webinar, which clearly shows your commitment towards the importance of inclusivity in education. And I would really like to acknowledge that. As most of you already know, the new education policy or the National Education Policy 2020, which was approved by the Union Cabinet of India on 29 July 2020, outlines the vision of India's new education system. The new policy replaces the previous policy on education, which was made in 1986. NEP 2020 is touted as a game changer policy document that envisions several thematic developments, paving way for the development of Indian students to be global citizens in the truest sense, be it teachers, parents, students, or experts. Most people are happy and excited about most of its recommendations. Now, one of the core focus of NEP is that it aims to ensure equity and inclusion in and through education. This inclusion is proposed by addressing all forms of exclusion and marginalization, disparity, vulnerability, and inequality, both in education access and in learning outcomes. I would like to repeat this. This is very important. One of the core focus of NEP is that it aims to ensure equity and inclusion in and through education. This inclusion is proposed by addressing all forms of exclusion and marginalization, disparity, vulnerability, and inequality, both in education access and in learning outcomes. Now, today, we're very lucky that we have two very eminent speakers amongst us who come with decades of experience in the education space and in policy also, and who will help us understand the present gaps in education system as regards inclusivity, and also help us build an understanding as to how NEP is focused on bridging these gaps. Uh, it's my privilege to introduce both of these speakers to you. Our first speaker, Mrs. Sapna Sukul. She's an education consultant and she's also a founder of EduStart Solutions. An educator since 1996, Mrs. Sapna Sukul has introduced several innovative learning methods and teaching techniques necessary for evolution of the education system. Apart from managing international students exchange through British Council and American Field Survey, she's also conducted teacher training workshops and seminars for British Council, Pearson Education, and Macmillan Education. She has worked with NGOs such as TERI, Roots to Roots, Child Reach International, and was also the former director of NGO Sparsh, which provides assistance to marginalized and special needs children. She conducted around 100 sessions during the lockdown, along with various state webinars to discuss NEP implementation plans. Our second speaker for today, Dr. Shakila Shamshu. Dr. Shakila Shamshu is a very popular name. People who have been following NEP very closely. She's a former officer on special duty, Department of Higher Education, GOI. She's passionate advocate of inclusive education and collaborative learning. She holds a gold medal in Masters of Political Science and PhD in Education. She has actively she was actively involved in formulating India's new education policy 2020. She is instrumental in facilitating new directions in pedagogy. Dr. Shamshu believes in bringing down the boundaries between academic and co-curricular curriculum. Now, this webinar will last for about 60 minutes. Right after I finish this introduction, you will get to hear our first speaker, Mrs. Sapna Sukul. This will be followed by a session by Dr. Shakila Shamshu. Post this, we will be taking questions from the audience for about 20 to 25 minutes. In case you have any questions while the speakers are sharing their views, Please feel free to type those questions in the chat box. Our team will pick up the most relevant questions, which will be then asked to the speakers towards the end once they are done with their sessions. All right. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker for the evening, Mrs. Sapna Sukul.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you, Chirag, and namaste, Dr. Shakila ji. So it's an honor to be with Dr. Shakila because when this NEP was being made and when it was very new and we all were streaming that what exactly it's bringing. So many videos which I've seen are by Dr. Shakila, and so it's speaking in front of her for on NEP will be a challenge, and not only a challenge, but it will not. I'll not do justice. So I just put points across which I feel are very are good takeaways, and I feel that leaving no child behind. And as you said that I've conducted webinars for state, so I felt that the mission to conduct the not mission, the aim to conduct these webinars, which we are doing in series with in collaboration with the education world, is the idea came from Madhya Pradesh, and we did this because that time the policy was just being implemented. It was, I remember, 12th of August. So the Tripathi ji, director, he spoke about the policy, and we all understood that was the first instance on 12th of August when we did NEP first webinar for Madhya Pradesh state, and thereafter we took on states. And the idea was to bridge the gap between the government and the private schools and create a platform where both the parties, both the schools, both government spokesperson and private schools are together, and they can raise questions to the government authority. Uh, People can ask questions to the government authority where they can answer, and we know a little bit more from the state perspective. So even slowly, my I'll say the approach or the learning from this has become a little more deeper, because from every state when we are doing, I have already done 6 states till now, and every state we are seeing that how the state is like implementing or trying to implement NEP, whether it is Uttar Pradesh where they have started Prerna. Then I've done like for Delhi government when I'm talking, so they've already told me that they have a Nishta program, happiness curriculum. Jammu and Kashmir also is not left behind, where they are very keen to implement, and the secretary has said that. And they have also, what I like is that they are all for in the learning mode. So the private schools are happily participating and dealing with whatever they want. They can, they are ready to like collaborate and work together. So that's one best thing which has happened, which had it not been through NEP, like it was there was a gap. Now it's the policy clearly mentions that learning gap between the low and the high fee schools are likely to get exacerbated. So it's trying to bridge the gap between remote learning and the existing schools, which are influential schools. They also say that one more, what I read was that 45.5% of students in private school, which they pay less than 1,000 rupee fee, will benefit from this policy, because everything will be merged together, whether it is government or influential schools or low marginalized schools. So the 4 pillars of education, which is learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to be together, will be uh, implemented. So these things which were earlier just I felt, whether it is skill development, whether it is happiness curriculum, whether it is bagless day policy, whether it is teaching in their own language. Every region can pick up their own language to teach that subject. So this also I found that in Madhya Pradesh they have already started uh, creating SCRT has already started making books in their subject. UP is already started working. UP has already the secretary told me that they have 3 uh, training programs which are mandatory for teachers, which are already through Diksha portal. They have, their teachers have done this program. So it's through lockdown, I'll say, that people like me have got little access to the states. And not only me, that entire the people who log in, who watch on Facebook, they are getting to know that every state is very, very active. And we all are trying to implement this beautiful document which has come. And so much of research. I was listening to Dr. Shakila's one of the webinars where she told us that how much research has gone into it, and uh, who all did they consult. So everything is now trying to, like, we are trying to weave it into a public and private partnership along with government officials, where what challenges I face sometimes, I'll say, to organize these state webinars is to get to the education secretary and asking them to join us for giving their perspective about NEP. That's a bit of challenge which I feel every time to organize a state webinar is a big, little bit challenge. Not very big, but yes, the idea is to connect to all the states. We have done 6 states. We are looking forward to 4 more states which are already in pipeline, and to learning a little bit more, because what exactly the states are going ahead and doing. Because after speaking to Chirag, I again got back to the states and I asked them that, is there any further progress? So everyone has sent a document or something that what all the state government is doing with the SCRT syllabus, with the SCRT team, and with the public schools. So yes, the policy speaks volumes about the good governance, the good education system, the good, I'll say, how to develop a holistic child, as whether it is in government school or private school. So that's what I feel NEP has to offer. So thank you. Chirag, should I carry on? You said
Yeah, yeah.
7 minutes.
Sure. So, thank you so much for your views, ma'am, and I'll come back to you a little later in the session. I would like to now move on the discussion and invite Dr. Shakila to share her views. I think you've laid the basic foundation of what we are all expecting from NEP in terms of inclusion. Dr. Shakila can now share her views and expand on this. Thank you, ma'am. Please take the
Yeah,
stage.
good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Chirag, and thank you, Sapna, for sharing your views on how you're taking it forward with the states. It was quite fascinating for me to see an invite coming from Ennoble Foundation, and particularly the title of it was something that really caught my eye, to say "Leaving No Child Behind," because that is basically the spirit of this particular policy. Now, the NEP 2020, for all those who are attending this discussion, Chirag has already told the date of the approval and that we are at varying stages of trying to sort of implement the policy. But I think it is important to understand, and I think it's about 4:20 now. Can I go on for 10 minutes, Chirag?
Yeah, you can take it longer, ma'am. Please.
Okay, okay. So I'll keep it for about 15 minutes so that I do justice to the topic itself. I mean, it is too exhaustive to really, I mean, I have taken sessions, and if Sapna ji has said she has seen my videos, there are sessions where I've gone on for even 3 hours talking about NEP. And if you want to understand a nuanced understanding of the policy, you do take a lot of time in putting forward the rationale and the spirit and the principles with which it is based. But let me try to confine myself to about 15 minutes to specifically the topic of inclusivity within the NEP. Now, as a policy, we are committed to the Sustainable Development Goals, and uh, we have clearly said that the SDG Goal 4 is our driving philosophy, and that is to ensure inclusive and quality equitable education for all with lifelong learning opportunities. This particular SDG goal itself, and reflected by the fact of the learning in the 21st century, the 4 pillars that Sapna ji has also referred to, actually show the underpinnings of trying to ensure equitable access to learning and providing quality education so that learning outcomes are sort of emphasized, with a certain degree of ensuring affordable education and making all stakeholders, whether they're parents or teachers or students or the educational institutions themselves, the government, all of them being accountable for the task that they are expected to carry out. So the 5 pillars of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability has been further outlined in about 22 cardinal principles outlined in the chapter 1, that the introduction of this policy. And I would request and urge each one of you to have a look at those 22 principles. The very first one starting with and that is the most significant one, and the reason why this policy I think would be a game changer, as you yourself mentioned, that is to recognize, identify, and nurture the unique potentials of every child and work towards his or her holistic development. This is where I think we understand the uniqueness of every child, and that there is, enormous diversity in the capacities of each child. And you have a system of education. We are all beneficiaries of all your policies, and it is not that this particular policy is a distinct break from the previous policies. Always policies are in a continuum, and they are a response to the evolving changes that happens. So the current evolving changes, where you have information and communication technologies, where you have scientific knowledge that is bordering on innovation, and the fact that we are living in challenging situations of individual crisis, social crisis, and the economic, the diverse, the let us say the drivers for economic development, all these call for changes. But what is significant is that the structured system of education that we are used to cannot serve the purpose of a particular country, which at the moment is blessed with the largest youth population in the world, and which is likely to last for something like about 37 years, and that's going to something like about 2037 or so. That's almost about 20 years from now. We are still going to be the youngest population in the world. And this set of people, if they are made to think that you have to have a structured educational system where every child is seen as a clone of another child, then you cannot explore, or you cannot draw out the innate potential of every child. So someone may be good at mathematics, someone may be good at science, someone may be in languages, someone may be in performing arts, someone would be in sports, someone would be in some other creative form. And I think, and the policy tries to say that each of these talents and each of these capabilities and each of these skills that children have are equally to be respected and to be nurtured. And you cannot tell that there are only two holy professions in this world, and that is to either be a doctor or to be an engineer, and to condemn every other child who is incapable of performing in these two fields as being not, a failure, so to say, and therefore condemning them to be sort of academically tarnished, to say that they will not be able to become successful. Whereas if you want any empirical evidence, you have a look at those who were the top performers of the class 10 and the class 12, and then have a look at where they are today, and the success stories you will find would be somewhere else. It is not that these are the only two areas that we need to focus upon. Now, coming to the idea of inclusion itself, and that the policy itself outlines what is your mission statement of leaving no child behind. The enormous diversity has resulted in a lot of, I would say, disadvantaged sections being left out of the education system. Now, we have coined in the draft NEP, the 2019 484-page document, we had used a word underrepresented groups. But when we wrote the NEP 2020, we had said a more acceptable term of saying socially and economically disadvantaged groups. And these socially and economically disadvantaged groups is a distinct variation from what was used in the 86 policy, where you had separate subsection for promoting the education of the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, the minorities, girls, differently abled, tribal children, and so on. Here we have tried to say in a very all-encompassing term of socially and economically disadvantaged groups, to include those that come out of the social and the caste or the community-based representation, and therefore covering the SCs, the STs, the OBCs, and the minorities. Gender, therefore women and transgenders. Those coming from urban poor, therefore that category of those who are economically not in a position. Geographical location, those in extremely remote areas, hill regions, tribal regions, this could be another category. The differently able, both the learning disabilities as well as the other disabilities coming into the picture. Children coming from migrant families, coming from vulnerable situations, and all these categories, we have thought of putting them together as the socially and economically disadvantaged groups. And the idea is that all the principles of multiple pathways of learning, the idea that when we have the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 restructuring of the school curriculum, where we are trying to look at the age 3, where because of neural networks being developed maximum in that age between 3 to 6, you will find that children who are not having any exposure to assimilating or understanding what is happening around, that child is in a certain sense disadvantaged vis-a-vis another child who goes to a preschool or a play school where there is an exposure to that kind of a learning that is happening. And this learning, let us be very clear, is not formal learning. It is not using the pen and the pen paper and the pencil. It is where the child's creative abilities are actually sort of leveraged or are sort of explored, so that the child in a very joyful, creative manner is the one who's sort of benefiting from that kind of environment or an ecosystem of early learning. Early learning cannot be formal learning at all. And the present system, let me make this very, very clear, it hurts to see that a parent comes as a friend to your home and asks the 3-year-old to write, to, say by heart nursery rhymes in English language. So you are actually bringing about structured learning. That is not what the child is capable of. The child has to have creative learning. So the current preschools and the play schools, where you have a downward progression of class 1 syllabi, of learning alphabets, of learning numericals, that is not early learning at all. What we are saying is that between the ages of 3 to 6, in the early childhood care and education, you will only bring exposure to the child to understand things that happen around in terms of shapes, in terms of colors, in terms of connections that happen. And this is all to take place only through activity-based joyful learning. Now, in an Indian context, where is inclusion coming over here? There is the higher middle class and the middle class and above are sending their children to preschools and play schools. I'm not saying that that has been good, because that is not the kind of joyful learning that we are talking about. But there is a set of children who go to the Anganwadis, and where you have health, nutrition, and education to take place. But because the Anganwadi worker is overloaded, it is only the immunization program and the nutrition program that gets addressed, and there is no learning. And the scientific evidence tells us that the ages between 0 to 6, where the maximum neural networks and the neural synapses get connected in our brain, if you see a picture of the brain scan, you will see that a child who's had early learning and a child who's not had early learning, the neural networks are connected in one and the neural networks are not connected in another. We had that in our PPT presentations when we were making this policy, which clearly showed that right there, you should target those sections who are not coming into early learning and ensure that inclusion is brought about. Going further, the flexible pathways where we set the curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular, we will do away with. We had 4 stages, the foundational, the preparatory, the middle, and the secondary stage. From the middle stage onwards, that is from class 6 onwards, we would not like to have this straight-jacketed categorization of curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular, and allow games, sports, poetry, drama, painting, all these subjects to have the same weightage as other subjects. And this flexible pathway will also ensure a great degree of inclusivity. The third dimension that we have thought about is the multilingualism. And 21st of February happens to be the International Day of Mother Tongue Language Education. And it clearly said that if you recognize multiple languages to be sort of promoted and encouraged, and that children learn best, cognitive development takes place best when they learn in their languages. But the narrative should never be to say that you would insist on teaching in a particular language. So when the policy said that we will encourage language learning, or rather mother tongue instruction in early classes, if we were to say that this has to be mandatorily followed, then we would also be self-defeating our own idea of flexibility. So we are leaving it to the states to actually decide whether they would like to go in for mother tongue education. But we have not said that that would preclude the states from actually teaching in multiple languages, or they preclude the states and the schools to say that they would not teach other languages. Because there is enough evidence to say children between the ages of 2 to 8 have an enormous capability to pick up languages. And the UNESCO report or the study says as many as 18 languages can be picked up by children between the ages of 2 to 8. And that is in an effortless manner. Language learning becomes difficult as we grow older. So multilingualism is another aspect of it. Now coming to the equity measures itself, the fact that for the hearing impaired, we want to talk about an Indian Sign Language will be a universal sign language. The fact that we wanted that for children with learning disabilities, you will have integrated curriculum and inclusive teaching methodologies rather than segregating them, because that has been long abandoned world over. When you categorize the differently abled and put them into one category, and here again for those with learning disabilities, if you bring them into the class with a regular child, there is a kind of an impact that takes place in the learning that happens between those who happen to be so-called normal and those who happen to be so-called as not being treated as normal. So here we would like special educators to be more sensitized to deal with learning disabilities. The pre-service B.Ed programs will ensure that all these kind of pedagogies and teaching methodologies and teaching tools would be brought in, other than, of course, the fact that infrastructure with assistive devices using information and communication technology would be used for the differently abled. One other aspect of equity that we are trying to focus upon is that ultimately when you are saying you want sustainable development and you are talking about universal retention of children from ages 3 to 18 and a target where we have said that we will do this by 2030, which seems a very, very ambitious target that we have set for ourselves, where we say that we will ensure that all children who have joined schools will continue their education up to the secondary stage or 18 years of age, ensuring that no child goes out of the schooling system. You will have to have measures of not just foundational literacy and numeracy that we are talking about, where we are trying to bring back dropout children who have actually, because of language barriers or because they did not have early learning, did not know the basic reading, writing, and mathematical skills or the numerical skills. Therefore, we have a foundational literacy and numeracy mission. We are talking in terms of remedial coaching that will have to be done. And I dislike that word a lot, because it is not that there is some disease and therefore they need a remedy. It is only a learning gap, and you need to have some sort of intervention. Now that intervention cannot be definitely done only by the teacher, because the teacher has a lot of academic load that comes onto them. And therefore we would like to use the community and the social workers to actually start getting roped into this exercise, who along with the schools could be able to carry forward this particular goal of trying to ensure inclusive education, so that those who are falling behind are also brought at the same learning levels as much as the other students. Then we are talking about specific measures like setting up special education zones with population of concentrated populations of SCs and STs, so that you can have, greater funding and more focused attention being given to the education of children coming from these backgrounds, because they may be in all probability first generation learners, and therefore they don't have a system of falling back for family support or even social support, and therefore having special education zones would allow for greater funding as well as for focused attention, setting up schools in unserved and underserved areas, and also setting up inclusion funds, social inclusion funds, gender inclusion funds, creating more hostel facilities, trying to provide study rooms, trying to provide them learning resources, trying bilingual teaching, particularly in tribal dialects, so that ashram shalas and schools, you see, ultimately, for us, we should not look at for the child, it is whether the child is getting a school from the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, or whether it is from the Ministry of Defense, or whether it is from the Ministry of Education, it doesn't matter. All these schools need to implement the NEP in its spirit. And therefore, we would like to see that all these schools have all these facilities being made available, so as to ensure that, as your dictum says, that we leave no child behind. But what is most important in all these exercises is that we need to ensure that we provide for free schooling, and we provide for scholarships which will ensure that, wherever there is a crisis of means, that is not preventing a child from coming into school because they don't have the economic means to afford it. So the idea of affordable education from the early ages onwards, through your entire schooling system, and this is carried forward even into higher education, but I'd not go into that, the focus of it being on the school education, and the idea of bilingual teaching, the idea of having textbooks into regional languages, the idea of encouraging children with disabilities. And I must tell a particular point, the scheme we are talking about gifted children, and gifted children is also a kind of inclusion, because there are children who are by nature, who are able to pick up much faster and who can be fast tracked. Now, when we talk of gifted children, there are these twice exceptional children, particularly those with autistic backgrounds. Now, we must recognize this aspect of autism, because autistic children tend to have a special talent in a particular area which is not recognized, because we treat them as being a nuisance and therefore don't want to integrate them. This policy basically says, when we talk about schemes for the gifted children, we would also like the twice exceptional to be taken into consideration. So overall, and the concept of lifelong learning, and when you say leaving no child behind, the idea of adult education and andragogy also comes in. It's not just the child, ensuring that every living being in this country is given adequate opportunities for their continued contributions and making themselves having a fulfilling life. And therefore, the journey of the NEP, in terms of trying to say that it will create enabling ecosystems, it will create flexible pathways, learning pathways, it will try to address the lower learning outcomes of children, it will try to address all the existing disparities, whether it is urban and rural, whether it is social, whether it is gender, and so on. It will seek to address all these through appropriate interventions. But all this can be possible only if every stakeholder, and I keep saying that don't wait for directives to come for a policy to get implemented. As educators, let us do our bit. As parents, let us do our bit. As students, let us do our bit. And while you have the rules and regulations coming, you will have better teaching taking place. Once children understand the importance that, they are being recognized and that every child is important, that child also feels that he or her should take the joy of learning. This is where I think we have tried in this policy to bring about a joy of learning and making it a celebration for us to understand, so that children don't come into school feeling morose, but children come into school with an attraction to actually be a participant along with the teacher, along with fellow students in this whole journey of trying to have better knowledge, better skills, and better capabilities based on his or her own talent and potential. I think I'll stop over here and take on any questions that come about. Thank you very much.
Uh, Thank you so much, ma'am, for this very uh, passionate session. I think you took us through the entire journey of NEP and what all does it encompass in terms of inclusivity in a brief. But you covered a lot of ground in several directions. The one question which I would like to ask in the very beginning to you is that, ma'am, right now the education system is at a certain level, which is level X, and the new education policy proposes a very transformative thing wherein suddenly uh, all the other kinds of education like drama, music, all these would start getting weightage. So and while these ideas are welcome, where do you see a starting point of these ideas? For example, if we are looking at rural schools, let's say in Odisha or Chhattisgarh, and we're looking at implementing these programs, how do you see this getting implemented in short run over the next 2 or 3 years?
Can
No,
I?
yes, Sapnaji, you were wanting to go ahead, please, because
No,
you're
no,
jumping.
I just wanted to say one point in this, like when he said that how it will be implemented. So just 2 days back, one of the private school has connected with the government schools, and they've signed some MOU that they can, the private school are lending their ground and their uh, teachers, the specialized teachers, to teach the government school children. So I think that's one move. Then, ma'am, over to you, because that's just come, and I really like that move.
The idea, therefore, is, of course, sharing of resources, but let me be very specific also. You see, when we proposed in the class 6 vocational crafts to be introduced, where children would learn about pottery and carpentry and all those kind of crafts which India is so familiar with, we are all wondering where are the teachers going to come for these. And basically, India has a rich repository of human resources who are artisans and craftsmen available in the rural areas. Now, we don't use those people at all because we think that they are not teachers. But the policy has clearly stated that you will have a 10 days bagless period where you can intern yourself with local craftsmen. Now, when it comes to even areas of using drama and poetry and all that, India is diverse. What is folklore in Chhattisgarh and what is folklore in Kerala or what is folklore in Jammu and Kashmir is all different. Folk art forms are different. So, and since in the schools, it is largely contextualized education, it is not one size fits all. Whatever is contextualized to a particular state and whatever areas that they would like to bring about. And let us be very sure about the fact that we are not having a paucity of people who specialize in these areas and who would be available. But that would require an enormous effort on the state governments, the school managing committees, both the government and the private ones, actually trying to understand what are the local resources that are available and use those resources so that these subjects could also be woven in. Of course, you will have to wait for a curricula to come in a broad sense, but you can already start, introducing that. But Chirag, you should understand the policy has to wait for the National Curriculum Framework for School Education. There is the NCFSC that is to be brought about. There is a national curriculum and that is a pedagogical framework that we are bringing about for early childhood care and education. Because while we are saying that one size does not fit all, a broad framework has to be there in which you will allow for the local contextualization. But any policy, when it comes, you will have actions taking place in parallel for some time. Now, you are only familiar right now with the 10 plus 2 plus 3. We are all products of the 11 plus 4. You may not have even heard of it because you may not have been born that time. But we are products of 11 plus 4 system. And when the 11 plus 4 ended and the 10 plus 2 started, it went on in parallel. And today, you don't even look at the 11 plus 4. You only see the 10 plus 2. So when you have the 10 plus 2 right now, and you have the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 coming into being, it goes on in parallel for a certain time, and then the gradual phasing of an earlier type and the new one comes into being. And it happens so seamlessly. It is only today when you juxtapose a new reform in an existing system, it seems undoable. But it is pragmatic and it is doable. It's only a question of each state working out its own strategy. And it is like, this is one possibility where states, schools, and private schools come together for sharing their resources. We ourselves have talked about a school complex, which we envisage the public and the private schools to be taken together at a school complex. Now, this is all left to each state, whether they would like to get in their private schools or only use the government schools. And when you create a complex, what are the kind of sharing of resources you do? But as long as you don't think of education as being a private good, and you see that education is a public good, and that it is something that we must mandate it for our children, and just because it seems to be the lack of some resources, we should not deny that child the facility to get that. But yes, it would be constrained by the availability of human resources. So if you don't have someone who can teach drama or who can't teach poetry, and that is not available in a certain vicinity where it can be brought to the school, then you might have to think in terms of blended modes where you can think of online classes. Today, thanks to COVID, people are learning yoga on the online method. They're learning so many things online. So I sometimes somehow see COVID as being one which brought that kind of technology acceleration, which India would have taken maybe 10 years from now, but we are already into it because of COVID, with no underscoring the fact that it has caused enormous agonies to many of us in terms of livelihood and all those aspects. But this has been an advantage from the education part of it, and online learning of many skills.
Ma'am, I have a question. So I was just wondering, ma'am, we have been talking as teachers, as educators, we have been discussing policy and reading a lot, but now the schools have reopened. And many a time the parents are asking in general in conversation that what is going to happen? Do we focus on studies? Do we focus on marks? Or do we just leave it now, leave the child because they have just been, I'm talking from a layman's language. So how do we make them understand about this policy in a simpler form? Is it through webinar? Is it through conferences? Is it through, what should be the method?
No, so Sapna, it is basically the idea is to spread the word around by trying to actually talk to people. And since we are not in a position to go down physically, since you said you have Googled and seen a lot of videos, speak wherever it is possible. Like Ennoble Foundation coming to me is something where I see that as an opportunity to spread the word around. Every 30 participants sitting over here is therefore going to be an advocacy campaign taking that forward. Of course, I'm not saying that the totality of the NEP may be acceptable to someone, but whatever is the takeaway that that person has is going to spread that around. So this is the only way in which you can have a multiplier effect. It has to have a dominoes effect in that manner, by which, there is a general spread. And let me be very fair that if you look at the news that gets covered for the NEP, you will have many nuanced discussions that have been happening on it. And each catchment of population has a different take. So in Kerala, many of the private schools are actually wondering whether they could they have already done crash courses on early learning and education. They are doing something in terms of multidisciplinary education at the from the middle school onwards. So depending upon the state's preparedness, it is very important, both institutional preparedness, the teachers' preparedness, and the state government's preparedness. And we somehow are not taking into consideration how much is the ability of a student to understand that. And therefore, to talk to student population is I would feel the greatest challenge, because we are talking to educators, we are talking to state governments, we are talking to institutions, but we are not talking to the students. And I would really like to see more students, young students, and mind you, they are the children of the millennia, where they have been born with the mobile in their hand, and where they know what is, the kind of artificial intelligence and robotics and all that, because they enjoy Avengers, they enjoy Transformers. You would be amazed how a 3-year-old child describes that to you, because you have not understood 50% of the movie. The child has understood that in such a nuanced manner. So they are the children of the millennia, and they will not be resistant to many of the things that we are talking about. It is our own baggage that is preventing us from thinking that we cannot do that. So we need to talk to students, and Sapnaji, I think it is just spreading the word around. That's the only way to go about it.
Thank you. So you're just like, I think you've highlighted a lot about access, affordability, equality, and accountability. So all 4 aspects you've so beautifully covered in this time that I'm speechless. I want to hear more from you, that what all can be done to make it more impactful, like when I'm going from state to state. So the last state which we covered was Bihar, and we made it sure, we told the principal that allow the parents also to attend this, ask them to attend. So 1 or 2 schools, as you said, I just remember that they made it mandatory for parents that आपको भी attend करना है, इसमें आपके लिए बहुत take away होगा. So I guess that's a ripple effect, which I think I'll take it ahead with my other webinars. Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, we have time for a couple more questions. One question which is come up is joy of learning. You spoke about joy of learning a couple of times in your session, and you gave it a lot of importance in how it is really it can really cause transformation in education. So uh, if you could expand this further, because the as a concept or as an idea, everybody wants joy of learning, but in terms of how it would look like in a school, if you could just expand and give us your views.
So the joy of learning comes from the fact that who's the recipient of the learning? It's the learner. And in the system that we have followed so far, we have not engaged that learner in the classroom at all. So the learner is sitting in a class where there is a teacher who's coming in a very formal, the bell rings, the teacher walks into the class. This is the subject to be taught, social sciences or maths or whatever. The teacher comes in, and the teacher comes with a fixed curricula, and then the teacher starts teaching the class. The teacher is not even aware, in that class of 30 or 35 students, where do they stand at the level of understanding that particular subject in which he or she is going to teach. Now, not having done that, and where the teacher is only teaching, or rather lecturing to the child switches off mentally, because there is no engagement of that learner in the classroom at all. What has therefore to be done is to introduce activities, to put in questions. Instead of coming and starting off, you say that, okay, I'm going to teach, let us say, how do plants breathe? And then you actually bring in a couple of plants, or if there are plants around, make the child sensitive to that. And then you say, what do you know about plants? And ask the child. Every child would be enthusiastic to say what they think about the plant. What is it that they perceive about it? Now, what happens is, when you start with that, rather than the top down, the teacher down, and then the learner is made an integral part of that, the child becomes so enthused, and that child will be looking forward to a class of that kind. So the active learner engagement is the key to having the joy of learning. Children like to learn, but you have to come down to the level at which they would you speak in the language that they need to understand. If you think that you are standing 3 stairs above them in height, in your terms of your knowledge, which you are, but if the child is there, that child doesn't seem to understand that at all. So you need to come down to the level at which that child is able to understand what is happening. And that can only happen through activities, through kind of getting them the feel of it, contextualizing it, bringing experiments by which all of them are part of it, use, make them sit together in a group, give them some activity, that kind of active learner engagement. And it is not that the curricula does not lend itself to, because you're doing rote learning, you are looking at only marks at the end of it. You're not looking at the abilities and the competencies that the child has. It becomes a one-sided approach, and therefore the other child, so the child feels that education or learning is a burden. How do you make it where that child feels that he or she is an equal participant in that exercise along with the teacher? And then, the kind of enthusiasm, children are full of energy, and that energy has to be sort of actually used in a very, let us say, something which makes them very active. They cannot sit passively. Suppose you are, if even in a higher education system, where you say an 18-year-old is not very serious or motivated, and someone who's been in the teaching line for years on end, I could never be able to do that. Even when I started teaching, I had started teaching at a very young age, because I went on to do my remaining education while I was doing my teaching. I must have been in age as much as the student, maybe 2 or 3 years older only. I never thought, because I didn't want my professor coming into my class and not allowing me to ask questions, not allowing me to question what is being taught. The spirit of questioning itself and the spirit of inquiry. So child is curious, and that child's curiosity is the one that you need to address. So the joy of learning, and that's why I say the celebration of education is something that this policy has really tried to understand. And that is why in a class, if you're teaching and somebody says, no, I don't know anything about the plants, then you ask one child, you tell that child what you know about a plant. So then those two children get into a conversation. So they are ultimately, vibrant lives. And that vibrancy has to be brought into the classroom. And unfortunately, our teachers have to change the pedagogy, have to use new tools, and must be able to, and the assessment has to shift from rote learning, not asking them to test their memory, but actually making them have practicals and apply that knowledge in a certain context. And it should, as far as possible, be localized context. I had a history student who asked me a simple question: why should I learn the history of Mesopotamia, and where on earth is Mesopotamia? Now, this is something that you have to contextualize certain things. You must then make them understand that these are civilizations that existed, and so in history you need to learn that, but right now you contextualize it. So that is active learner engagement and the joy of learning.
Thank you, ma'am. We have time for just one last question. Uh, we have a question coming in wherein, you know, uh, so somebody has pointed out that art, music, and sports, and all of these are very important for the overall development of a child. And we want students to kind of build on these hobbies and possibly careers. But there's a huge mindset gap as of now. As to what the parents want, and what the students would generally be interested in. Uh, do you think NEP, in a way, uh, is kind of focused on addressing this challenge as well in the long term?
No, so the mindset already has changed. I personally do not watch television programs where very young children come in with their music talent and dance talent and so on. And I feel the childhood of that child has been totally gone by projecting them onto the media in that manner. But the fact that these programs have come speak about a fact that they think that there are careers possible even in these areas. And there is nothing wrong about it. To nurture a child to be a sports person, to be a singer, to be a dancer, to be a performer, to be an actor. Of course, maybe the attractiveness comes from the monetary success that it brings about. But it's not necessarily just that. Because today, when you are looking at a YouTube and you're seeing a person who's not a professional singer singing a song, It is just a kind of a talent that that person is projecting for people to understand. So the mindset in terms of formal employment and in terms of capabilities that we have, and the fact that in higher education we are talking about liberal arts education and holistic multidisciplinary education, we'll see a whole new arena of careers, new careers that are happening. And we must have all this coming about, because I'm not too sure about the impact people have when hearing this program. Artificial intelligence is going to take away many jobs that are being today done by humans. And just before this program, I was seeing the power of artificial intelligence, where I don't know whether many of you have seen it on WhatsApp, a video that is going around, where there is this young lady and where she wears on the augmented reality headset, and then she creates a hologram of herself on her hand, and then decides that that hologram becomes a reality identical to her, and speaking in a Japanese language which the person is not aware of. But the artificial intelligence is translating the language in which she is speaking into another language, and an identical holographic image of her that is there on the screen, parallel to the real image, is there on the platform which is being viewed by people in a particular auditorium. This is the level in which we are going to exist. Now, this change is so dynamic that unless we encourage the learning of multiple skills and subjects and areas and domains and disciplines, if one area that they studied is not going to hold them in good stead, there is some other talent or some other knowledge that that person can leverage upon. It is in this context that we have talked about flexible pathways, learning different subjects as per one's talents and potentials.
All right. So this brings us to the very end of our webinar. It has been
With MAM's this, I think we'll be soon the Pisa test, which is going to happen in 2022. So with the NEP and all, which is the ways government is taking on, I think we'll be doing very well in Pisa test. I'm sure.
Yes, I think the Pisa test should be for India. We should definitely, and the states identified should be definitely able to perform much better on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was actually about to come to you, Sapna ma'am. In case you have any parting comments for this session, just a quick 2 minutes.
My parting comment is that I got to hear from Shakila ma'am directly, and as I said, I had prepared so much, but I'm just speechless. I just want to listen to her and everything she has covered. So I just feel that learning gap which was there or which was existing pre-COVID era and before NEP will be bridged because of webinar, because of such eminent people coming in discussing about what has happened. And I feel that the new revolution has already come, and we already are embracing it with change, whatever changes are coming. And now with this public-private partnership and the government partnership, things are moving on. And as the NEP says, by 2030, so I'm sure like we all are working towards it. In this, small baby steps have already started taking. Already CPD is in action. I was reading that UP government is doing 6,000 now, but their Vidyalayas, like 50 hours of CPD is already done. They have already set up their platform. So many such platforms are already being set up, and I guess people like you who are doing such wonderful job. And I was reading about Ennoble, like what your organization does. So you make those benches, and the bag and the bench is one full set, which was such a innovative way of spreading this good thing. And I saw that you're giving this as a complimentary to all the people who can't afford. So that affordability sector, which you are covering through bags, which turn into benches. And I saw the video where the child is sitting on the floor and writing on that bag, which is, he took out the books and he starts writing. So something like this, such innovative means of there to just cover whatever is going on. And even as like we saw the Miss India, how this Miss India has who is, like, we all know the story. So I guess there will be many more such children who will be like dreaming big and completing their dreams through education, which is being sustainable and covering all SDG goals, which is affordable, which is which leaves no child behind. So I think thank you, Ennoble, and thank you, Shakila ma'am, for just wonderful platform which you have given. Thank you.
Thank you, Sapna ma'am. Shakila ma'am, would like to request you to share party comments. I mean, just your learning as to how organization like ours or Sapna ma'am or people present in the webinar, how we can partner and how we can contribute to achieving the objectives of NEP 2030.
So the any organization, and I'm particularly happy that Sapnaji mentioned about your innovative work in the bag and the bench being sort of given across, and something that I had seen also, and even Sapnaji's effort of trying to reach out to the school. So as I said that education has, every one of us is a stakeholder in education. Everyone. It touches the lives of everyone. It's not something like you're talking about economic policy and many people could say it doesn't touch our lives at all. It touches, but they don't have to go through it. But education is something that touches the lives of everyone in a very, very close context. And therefore, whether it's a parent or a child or any person, whatever position that they are, have had their brush with education. And the idea is to see that we all play our bit. But let us not start looking at each one of us as Atlas having the globe on our shoulder, because doing your bit in terms of like let's say NGOs getting partnered with institutions, like I said, remedial teaching, for example. Though I dislike the word, the idea is that there are children who have learning gaps. And we need to identify who those children are, go down there actually to their homes. So the cluster resource centers have people who actually go down to each home and say during the schooling hours whether the child is there, or if the child is not coming to school, why is the child not coming to school, and trying to bring that child. So while the midday meal scheme has the attraction, because the kind of living hunger that is there in this country, and something that we shouldn't be, it should not be glossed over by the fact that we've made technological advancements. The reality is that there is a lot of hunger in the there is poverty and there is hunger, and these are very harsh realities within which we are living. Now for someone who's not having 2 square meals a day, education seems to be as good as getting a limousine for ourselves. So that is something that they would not like to. So the question is of reaching out to people. So India is a country which has so much of levels at which we are, and each functioning body that is there can play a role even in that own minimalistic space that is available. Even that makes a lot of difference. So for the NEP organizations like y'all, we are actually looking at the marginalized sections who are not able to come into education. How do we go to them? Because maybe they don't understand English as a language, or they don't understand Hindi as a language, and they speak something else. So can we make it in a language that they can understand? It could be anything, maybe regional books, whatever. Or it could be, if they're tribal population, getting it in their own dialects, people who can, speak that language that they can understand. It could be any number of initiatives that we can think of. As Sapna ji mentioned, it basically, the key word is innovation. And it allows you to have multiple innovative strategies. Now, these you need not really wait to see whether government has to approve. As long as you are not doing something that is unconstitutional or against the security and the integrity of this own country, and you're doing something to further the cause of education, in looking at education being a public service, and you are doing your own innovative strategy. So, drug abuse that is happening, you can look at so many remedial ways of trying to actually address any of these issues. Contextualizing the material, it could be bilingual teaching, it could be any ways. I mean, there are so many activities that one could think of, because India is a country which is having diverse needs or diverse set of people. And the fact that you're sensitive to that, and then you try to address that by actually taking a very proactive step. And that's why I always think in this whole system, the worker of the cluster resource center who goes to a home in a remote habitat, which may have only 10 houses in that particular village, and then saying that the child is not coming to school, why is that child not coming, and trying to bring that child to the school, or trying to arrange for a transportation. Because you see, in a country where you it's a hillock, both sides, it's one village, but there is a hillock in between. Therefore, the child has to travel a whole distance to come to school. What is the facility that can be given? So I think we have enormous possibilities, and the policy is allowing so many opportunities for each one of us to try and contribute to a better learning. And I think as educators, as social workers, as people who have a conscience, I think we just need to do our bit to ensure that we provide some education to our children, which will hold them in good stead in the coming years.
Brilliant, ma'am. Thank you so much for your views. So with that, we come to an end of this webinar. I would like to especially thank Dr. Shakila, ma'am, to make time for this webinar. She has a very busy schedule, as we all know. But I think she, I mean, the fact that she could make time and she could share her views, and she gave this topic so much importance really speaks volumes about her passion with which she's with which she's wanting education to be transformed for India, and it's really inspiring for each one of us. Uh, you know, Listening to her and being a part of this webinar. I would also like to thank Sapna ma'am to take out time and to be able to have various conversations with us, so that it could be properly organized, this webinar. uh, Also, I would like to thank Mr. Ninad Jhala, especially. He's from the Anand Institute of Social Works, and he's been the main force behind us organizing these webinars on a regular basis. So thank you so much, sir, for your continuous support and guidance. And finally, the entire Ennoble team and all the participants who are a part of this webinar. Thank you so much for making time and contributing in various ways, and taking on this message of leaving no child behind in education forward in your respective communities. So thank you so much, everyone, and I
Thank
hope
you.
to be connecting with you in the upcoming webinars, which would be coming in the week of in the month of March. Until then, bye bye. Take care, and
Thank you. Thank
we'll
you.
see you
Thank you.
soon. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thanks, ma'am. Thanks, Shakila, ma'am. Thanks, Inath, sir.
Thank you.